Hello, good evening, and welcome in. I gotta say, this feels kinda weird, because I don't normally stream at night. So, this should be fun. I'm looking forward to it. Bubble, how you doing, buddy? It's gotta be like breakfast time for you, right? What you doing on this time? So, I decided, I just woke up. Yeah, so I decided I needed to read more. Sunday afternoons for me are fantastic, but I needed to, I've got a lot of books to read. I've got all these books sitting right here, plus the one I'm holding, and I was like, I gotta add a second option, so I chose Thursday evening my time. And hello, Hicks, good to see you. And 13th, hello, welcome in. Glad you're all here. I hope you've had a good week so far, almost to the end. I hope your Thursday has been successful in one way or another. And now here we are, ready to relax. Good then, I get to see you at least once a week. And I appreciate that, because my usual mod is probably asleep right about now, or maybe he's going to stream, I don't know. I don't remember. But he's in the UK, so it's nice to have a mod in here. Appreciate that. So yeah, this is it's a little bit weird for me. We'll see how the Thursday night goes. I may decide to switch it up to a different night at some point. Not sure, but yeah, we'll see. So tonight we are continuing. We've only just started in this book, and we are continuing with Beasts. There's the link right there if you want to read more about it online. Of course, I have my videos down below, but I've also got my YouTube. Rocky start to the week, but finishing it off good. Training done early tonight, sitting back with a glass of Moscato. You gave me such a hard time about drinking Moscato. And now, now you're drinking it. So, I just think that's kind of hilarious. Hilarious. But I'm glad you're relaxing. I'm glad you could be here. And, just as a reminder, Oh, how the tables have turned, indeed. Just as a reminder, our book club is coming up fast. You love it now? Now you understand. Coraline. Some of you may have read this book already. Some of you may have not, like me. I also did not see the movie. Didn't even know there was a movie. But we're reading it now for our book club. So the day before Halloween, Saturday the 30th, 6 p.m. Central, I'll be live streaming that with a whole bunch of other people as we discuss the book. However, if you want to get in on the tail end of me reading that book, if you're subscribed, you can join me in Discord tomorrow night, 7 p.m., as we continue to read through Coraline and hopefully finish it. It's a great book. It's creepy. It makes your head spin a little bit, and I love it. I've been thoroughly enjoying that book. So, yeah. So, without further ado, I think we should get into tonight's read of Beasts of the Plains. And we're on page 50, and I try and do like a very mini recap in Discord about what we've read so far. So if you're curious about the first leg of reading this, head over to Discord, check out the reading recap channel in Discord, and you'll see a little blurb in there, just a paragraph or so. Oh gosh. I'm going to be yawning a lot tonight, I'll tell you that much right now. Oh man. Oh, I almost forgot. We need to do our stream raiders. We're probably going to lose, and that's okay. But in the spirit of not, let's go out with a bang at least, shall we? Yes, get out of the way. There we go. We shall overcome, fear not. Alright, well, the battle plans have been laid. Do your best. Do your worst. Alright. Now that we've got that taken care of, let's continue with our book. If you remember, this book doesn't really, I mean, it has chapters, but it's not like chapter 1, chapter 2. It's literally the names of our characters, our animal characters, for the chapter titles. So I have no idea what's going to happen per section. I haven't read ahead. It just kind of gives me an idea of who this chapter might be about, or maybe the perspective of who it's coming from. So that's as much as I know. So I'll do a quick hydrate. And let's do it. So this one is titled Kubitar. Kubitar stood in formation with his company as the whole army assembled in a large circle surrounding the Tree of Kings, while the whole tribe was gathered around them. After all, this was not an event that anyone wanted to miss. Not even those who, like Kubitar, wished that his father would be waging war at the risk of having their fathers, brothers, and sons fall in battle. Kubitar watched Maekar stand in formation with his company. They were the last company to finish their training last summer. Most of them were just as eager as Makar was to demonstrate their prowess, their strength, and their ferocity. Makar was more eager than all of them were, since he wanted to prove to his father that he was a mighty warrior, just like their father was. Kubitar watched Menat and his father walk towards the large gathering under the tree. He couldn't help but notice that his father seemed concerned, worn out and upset. His father walked to the center of the gathering until he stood beneath the large tree with his head held high. The tribe buzzed with anticipation, as whispers and murmurs could be heard everywhere. Loud noises could be heard mostly from the mares and foals that were surrounding the army. His father raised his front right leg. The noise slowly died down. "Tomorrow," he yelled as loud as he could. The crowd grew silent as everyone tried to hear what he had to say next. "We march to war." The army cheered so loud Kubitar thought that every animal on the plains could hear them. He hoped that Rubu and the boars heard them. He hoped it would make them run as far away as they can to save themselves from being massacred. A feeling deep inside of Kubitar's gut told him otherwise. He couldn't understand why so many horses want to wage war against the boars, who were fleeing their own grazing lands to save themselves from the wolves and the lions. But it didn't matter whether he understood it or not. The tribe's warriors were marching to war. They were going to massacre the boars, and he was going to take part in it, whether he liked it or not. As the sun set behind him, Kubitar sat alone on a low hill as he looked out onto the eastern plains towards the direction where he could kill innocent boars tomorrow. The thing that agonized Kubitar the most wasn't the fact that he couldn't stop his father from attacking the innocent boars. What bothered him the most was the fact that he was going to take part in the massacre tomorrow, not only as a soldier, but as a company commander that would be leading others into it as well. He heard hoofs walking through the grass behind him. He turned around to see Menat and his father walking up towards him, so he got up and walked down to meet them. They stopped a few strides from him. No one spoke for a few breaths until his father said, "Litan, your second in command, told us you were here. You should be spending your time with your company. This is not the behavior I would expect from a company commander. You should learn from Makar, who was with his company, sharing stories with them and laughing with them like a commander should be on the eve of battle." Kubitar had so much that he wanted to say in response to that, but he kept silent instead. He didn't have the energy for the argument that would follow, what he wanted to say in response to his father's words. He didn't want to upset himself any more than he already was, especially not when it was too late to change anything. Menat spoke next, giving Kubitar the exemption from needing to reply. "We are doing our rounds, speaking to every company commander. We left your company for last. We decided to change the battle plans that we discussed with you earlier today. We will strike in 2 waves. You will lead the first wave with me, while your father and Makar will lead the second wave." Kubitar knew that there was no point in arguing to change the plans, even though he didn't like the new plan. A frontal attack, with the second wave crashing into the backs of the first wave, that will already be in the midst of battle, would cause more casualties than what he suggested earlier today. But changing the battle plans twice on the eve of battle would lead to a feeling of confusion and uncertainty that would cost more lives than the frontal attack in 2 waves would. He knew better than to try and change the battle plan after the orders were already passed on to the company commanders. "We leave at dawn. Go and get some rest. You will need it," Menat said as he turned around, cantering away, leaving Kubitar alone with his father. Both Kubitar and his father were caught by surprise by Menat's sudden departure. The silence that followed Menat's departure was loud and uncomfortable for both Kubitar and for his father. His father looked back towards the army. I I need to attend to the army. You should go back to your company. They will want to see you." Kubitar felt even more distant from his father after seeing how his father avoided speaking to him. His father turned around, trotting back towards the army. Kubitar stood there all alone on the hill for a few more moments before he slowly walked back towards his company. He was tired, and he might as well rest before tomorrow, before he became a murderer. The hooves of hundreds of stallions pounded the earth as the sun rose across the open plains. Kubitar was happy with the pace, which enabled him to pour his frustration and anger into the soft grass with his strong legs. At first light, the army set out at a trot. Shortly after they covered a few hundred strides, they increased their pace to a slow canter. After covering another 1,000 strides, they increased their pace to a fast canter. Kubitar couldn't help but realize that the fast pace was also bringing them closer to the boars, which meant getting closer to the moment he became a murderer. Closer to a battle that he would also bring many of the stallions with him to their deaths, while he was completely helpless in stopping it all from happening. The army was making a very loud approach. He hoped that the boars could hear it wherever they are. He hoped that they were already making their way south, so that the scouts will report their direction to his father and to Menat, who will then hopefully decide to turn the army around and head back to the tribe's grazing lands. Every now and then, Kubitar looked at Menat, who was running on the other end of the column. Menat seemed worried and tired. Kubitar wondered if it was because Menat was not as young and as strong as he used to be. The years took their toll on everyone, it seemed. Keeping up with this pace for thousands of strides was not easy for a mature stallion well past the prime. The land ahead of them was made up of hills that were almost 100 strides tall, with small valleys stretching out for over 1,000 strides between most hills. Kubitar rode over another low hill to find 5 scouts in full gallop running towards them. They sent 10 light hoof stallions ahead of the main force to stop the boars' location and to report their formation. The other 5 were probably lying low on a hill to the east, keeping an eye on the boars. When the scouts were only a few hundred of strides away from them, Menat called for a halt. Gradually and simultaneously, keeping a perfect line while maintaining the same formation, the army came to a full stop. Kubitar saw his father and Makar approaching from the rear to hear the scouts' report. Jakan, a tall and thin gray stallion, stood with the other 4 scouts behind him, standing at attention, ready to make his report, as Menat, Kubitar, Makar, and his father all stood in a semicircle facing him. "Report," Makar commanded Jakan. Kubitar's father looked at Makar with an approving nod, while giving Kubitar a disapproving glance as if his presence was not required or even necessary. Kubitar wasn't sure if it was because of the fact that he objected to the attack, or because his father wanted Makar to be seen as the future leader. Jakan started his report, which left Kubitar no time to continue thinking about why his presence was upsetting his father. "They are over the next hill, Your Highness," Jakan said, waiting to see if there were any specific questions. Every scout knew that you started with the main information of the scouting report, letting your commander ask the questions he wanted to know. "How many of them are there?" Makar asked, trying to assume command of the discussions with Jakan. Since Makar was Derubu's son, Jakan had no choice but to answer immediately. "Almost 1,000 in total, maybe a little more. Roughly 300 of them are warriors." As Makar tried to come up with the next question, Menat beat him to it. "Did they see you?" "I can't tell for certain, but they are still heading straight toward us," Jakan answered. "Where are the warriors located?" Derubu asked Jakan. Jakan stood a little taller, if that was even possible, considering the fact that he was answering the king. 100 or so at the front, another 5 squads of 10 to each side of the column, with about 100 at the rear. His father nodded to Manat, who nodded in return. His father walked toward the north end of the column. He stood facing the middle of the column, and all 6 companies turned around to face him. The Boers are too weak to protect themselves from the lions and wolves, and so they have come here, hoping that the lions and wolves would hunt us instead. Today we fight to keep the lions and wolves away from our lands, to keep our families safe. Remember that when we send the Boers back where they belong, which is away from us. Companies, prepare for battle. All 6 companies formed into 2 groups of 3 companies each, with a distance of 100 strides between the first group of 3 companies and the second group of 3 companies. Every company stretched out from north to south, with a distance of 2 strides between each horse and 1 to his left or right. Each group of companies spread out into a formation of 4 stallions deep in wide rows that connected the companies into one large formation. Kubitar ran to stand at the front row of his company as they were finishing up to form into rows. A few heartbeats after he was in position, Menat yelled, "Companies, charge." At Menat's command, the companies moved forward into a canter in a line that was straight as a blade of grass. Each and every horse among the 6 companies knew exactly how to pace themselves as they charged forward. The first 50 strides at a canter, increasing the pace every 100 strides till they were at a full gallop within 400 strides. They were at a full gallop when the hills in front of them were only a few hundred strides away. Kubitar had no illusion about what was to happen. Kubitar's company kept a perfectly straight line as they all kept the exact same pace as they ran up the hill. Over the hill they saw the Boers. Kubitar let out a sigh of relief when he only saw warriors in front of them. The rest of the herd was already retreating southeast over the next hill, moving as fast as they possibly could. The feeling of complete terror and a strong sense of urgency could be seen in their movements as the sows urged the piglets to run faster. Even though Kubitar knew that they would kill every last Boer warrior they faced, he took comfort in knowing that the majority of the herd would escape the Boer warriors' fate. The Boer warriors stood in a long wedge formation on the opposite hill, which was 900 strides from them. Once Kubitar's company ran over the hill, the Boer warriors charged forward to meet them head-on. With moments, both forces were able to clearly see figures of those who would soon crash into them. The distance between them was only 400 strides, when suddenly the Boers broke their wedge formation, splitting into dozens of squads of 10 that were spreading out to all sides. Each squad was made up of 2 rows of 5 Boers. The distance was only 200 strides. Kubitar focused on the first squad that was right in front of him. He was going to crash right into them within a few dozen strides. As they came within 10 strides from him, he leaped as high into the air as he could. The first Boer ran right under him. Just as Kubitar started to descend from his leap, he kicked down hard with his 2 front legs as his jump took him over the first Boer, crashing straight into the second one. His hooves met the face of the Boer in front of him with a loud, crunching sound as he kicked back hard with his back legs, sending the Boer behind him crashing into the ground. Kubitar landed with both of his front legs on the ground, while his back legs were still in the air. As Kubitar landed, he caught sight of Boers crashing into horses behind him. Before Kubitar had time to recover, another squad of Boers appeared right in front of him. Kubitar stopped and turned around, so his back legs were towards them. He kicked with both of his back legs as hard as he could when they came into kicking range. He felt his back legs make contact with the Boer's chest as another Boer rammed into his front right leg with his forehead. Kubitar fell to the ground right over the Boer. The Boer recovered quickly, trying to get up. Kubitar recovered even faster. He bit the Boer's left ear as hard as he could, locking his jaws tight as the Boer tried to scramble out of his grip. Kubitar pulled his head down. The Boer was thrown to the ground, right next to Kubitar's back legs. The boar was still dazed from Kubitar's vicious bite and from being pulled to the ground by his ears, while Kubitar pivoted his right side to lay on the ground as he kicked the boar with both of his back legs. His legs hit the boar with one hoof to the head and one to the neck. The boar fell to the ground, but he was still moving, trying to get up. Kubitar rose quickly onto his legs after kicking the boar. He lifted both of his front legs into the air and brought his legs down, smashing his hooves into the boar's head. His hooves cracked the boar's skull with a loud crunch sound. Kubitar looked around him, ready to charge at the first sight of fighting near him, but the battle was practically over. 100 strides to his left, a small group of a few dozen boars were surrounded. The mass of horses around them made it hard for him to accurately count them. Kubitar ran towards the surrounded boars, not sure what he was going to do when he reached them. When he did, he stood there, watching more and more stallions charge into them, kicking and biting the boars as they did. Within moments, the boars were completely overrun. Kubitar looked to the east. He was relieved to see that there was no sign of the retreating herd. He scanned the battlefield. He saw the dead bodies of boars spread out everywhere, but he also saw the bodies of dead horses spread out among them. As the short battle came to an end, Kubitar heard the screams of the wounded horses who had broken legs or had suffered wounds from tusks slashing through their legs and their stomachs. That was when Kubitar realized how lucky he was that when the boar crashed into him, he didn't break his leg or get his leg slashed open with those sharp tusks. If Kubitar's leg was facing the other way, the boar would have probably broken it, in which case he would have been Kubitar who was screaming on the ground with the rest of the wounded horses. The horses screaming all over the battlefield were not as lucky as he was. Now that the battle was over, Kubitar saw many of the horses jumping and cheering in celebration. They were celebrating what they saw as a great victory over an enemy force that threatened the tribe's safety. Kubitar scanned his surroundings, trying to count the number of stallions from his own company that they were still standing. He wanted to know how many of those horses in his company were wounded, and how many were killed in fighting. He forced himself to remember that there would be more than a few dead and wounded horses from his company. The very thought of returning home without some of the horses in his company sent a shiver down Kubitar's spine. He thought of the mares that would never see their stallions again, foals that would never see their fathers, mothers and fathers that will never see their sons again. And for what? For his father's foolish pride, for the hate that his father held in his heart for any and all other animals. Kubitar shook away the chain of thought. This was not the time to dwell on those kinds of thoughts. He needed to find Leitan, his second in command, for a report on the company's status and the well-being of the horses in his company. Kubitar! Someone called out to him from behind. Kubitar turned to find Cujo, a wide and heavily muscled gray stallion standing behind him. The look on Cujo's face told Kubitar exactly why it was Cujo, his third in the chain of command, who was here to report to him instead of Leitan. How many are dead besides Leitan? Kubitar asked firmly, not letting the shock of Leitan's death show in his voice. He needed to assume command and take control of events. He needed to make sure that his company saw it. Besides showing it to his company, he needed to demonstrate stable and unwavering leadership to his father and to Menet. This was not yet the time for grief, not for Leitan, and not for the rest of the fallen stallions. Cujo met Kubitar's eyes with a calm, yet sad face. He's not dead, Kubitar, but he will be soon. Kubitar understood immediately. Tusks could tear deep gashes into legs and stomachs. Take me to him. Cujo nodded, turning to lead Kubitar to where Leitan was dying. They made their way through the battlefield as more and more horses stepped away from the dead bodies in the center of the small valley, moving away from the battlefield. Across the battlefield, wounded animals were moaning and screaming. Kupitar wondered if any of them were boars. He hoped that any wounded boar that was still alive had any sense to stay still and quiet until all the horses had left the battlefield. A group of stallions from his company stood in a circle in front of him. As he approached, they parted to let him pass, and he saw Leitan lying on his right side in the middle of the circle, lying in a pool of his own blood. Leitan's back left leg was cut right above his knee on its left side, while another deep cut had torn his stomach open. Both cuts were bleeding heavily. The drag marks of blood near Leitan's body indicated that the other horses had dragged away the boars' bodies that were near Leitan when the battle had ended. Leitan lifted his head to see Kupitar approaching. Kupitar lowered his head as he kneeled beside Leitan, who was looking up at him. They both knew that these were Leitan's last moments. "You were a good friend, Leitan. I will always remember you." As his words left his mouth, he knew that those were the wrong words to say, but he didn't have time to prepare for anything better to say to his friend as he lay on the ground bleeding to death. Feeling stupid, guilty, and ashamed of himself, Kupitar shoved the thought away. Leitan looked around at the rest of the horses from the company who surrounded them. He looked at Kupitar with a pained look on his face. A concerned look grew on Leitan's face as if he was deep in thought. "I didn't think that my life would end this way, Kupitar," Leitan said slowly. Kupitar could see how hard it was for Leitan to speak. The words came out slowly and heavily, Leitan's lungs working hard to breathe while he tried to speak at the same time. "I did not think that today I would." Leitan tried to say more, but it was too hard for him. Kupitar stared into his eyes and saw Leitan slowly shut his eyes. Slowly, Leitan's breathing slowed down until it stopped completely. Kupitar stayed there for a few moments, dazed, hurt, tired, and above all angry to lose Leitan for this stupid attack. After a few moments, he forced himself to get up and stand straight. More stallions from his company were standing around him than there were earlier. Kupitar turned to Cujo and asked, "How many did we lose today?" "9, including Leitan," Cujo answered. "How many are injured who would have a difficult time marching back with the rest of the companies?" Kupitar asked. "4 for sure. Another one will find it to be very difficult," Cujo answered. "You did well, Cujo. I'm proud of you. Assemble the company in marching formation with the rest of the companies. I'm going to report to my father." Kupitar thought it would be a good idea to take 1 or 2 of the stallions from his company with him in case he needed someone to carry messages to Cujo. He looked at the rest of the horses from his company, trying to decide who he should take with him. He decided to take Malad, a tall, dun stallion, and Guban, a muscular and wide white stallion. Both knew how to keep quiet and to keep what they heard to themselves, which was exactly what Kupitar needed. "Malad, Guban," Kupitar called out to them. They both turned to face him, standing at attention, waiting for orders. "Come with me, in case I need messengers." Kupitar scanned the valley looking for his father or Menat. He spotted them on a hill to the east with Makar. Makar's company stood in formation 50 strides away at the base of the hill. Kupitar ran towards them with Malad and Guban beside him. His father, Menat, and Makar noticed him approaching. "How many are dead from your company?" his father asked when he arrived. 9. Leighton, my second among them. 5 who can't march back today. They might even need a few more days before they can march back. Hey, Shivy. Good to see you. Come on in. Relax. Hang out. How many casualties in total among our forces? His father studied him in silence. Kupitar thought he saw a hint of surprise in his father's face. Kupitar figured that if his father thought that he would be more shaken up and less in control and in command than he prepared to be. His father nodded to him in approval before answering his question. We have a total of 48 dead, including the dead from your company. A little over 50 who need a few days to recover. Kupitar, you and your company will stay here with the wounded. March back when everyone among the wounded can make it back without difficulty. The rest of us will return immediately. I don't want our absence from the tribe's grazing lands to be noticed by the bison. They might use the opportunity to attack us. With those words, his father turned away from him, setting out at a trot towards the rest of the army. Manat and Makar quickly followed him, with Makar's company falling in behind them. The rest of the army were already positioned in marching formation, with sentries spread out strategically across the valley to be able to spot any predator who might be approaching. Manat and his father had trained their army well. No order needed to be given for the sentries to be spread out by the company commanders. The army knew what to do in any given situation. Kupitar turned to Malad and Guban. Malad, go tell Kujo we are staying here with the wounded. I will join you soon. Malad turned and set out a canter to pass the order. Guban stood waiting for orders as Kupitar looked to the east. Aranel, hello. Good to see you. Don't worry about it. They just had the battle with the boars, which was unfortunate. And now we're dealing with the aftermath. Kupitar was happy to see that the boars were nowhere in sight. He did, however, spot movement in the distance to the east. He couldn't tell exactly how many, but it was most definitely not boars. Kupitar figured it was a matter of time before almost every wolf and lion out there was feasting on the dead bodies of boars and horses that lay behind him. So much dead prey was not going to go unnoticed, let alone wasted by predators who usually had to fight to be able to eat their prey. If not tonight, then tomorrow or in a few days these hills will be swarming with predators. Chances were that if Kupitar and the wounded were still here when those predators arrived, that they would avoid him and the wounded horses, focusing on the dead animals that won't give up a fight if a lion or wolf tried to eat them. Why fight a living and kicking horse when there were so many dead ones just lying on the ground? Kupitar wasn't going to push his luck and see if he was right or not. He turned to Guban and saw Malad approaching at a canter. Malad stopped when he reached Kupitar and Guban. I have followed your instructions, Kupitar. Kujo sent me to inform you that he's getting the wounded together, ready to move everyone west. He said the wounded will be surrounded by stallions who are in fighting condition, who can protect them in the case we run into any lions or wolves. He said he wants to, at least, get a few hills between us and the battlefield, to avoid encountering any predators who will probably be here soon. Kupitar nodded to Malad. Behind Malad, he saw the rest of the companies move out at a slow canter. The sentries joined them as they left the valley. Within moments, the rest of the army was over the hill to the west and out of sight. The sound of so many horses running together made the air itself vibrate. The very ground itself seemed as if it was shaking. The dead bodies lying on the ground looked as if they were moving up and down in perfect synchronicity with the pounding hooves. As the noise of the pounding hooves grew weaker and more distant, Kupitar figured the predators to the east would soon be coming to feast on the hundreds of carcasses that lay on the ground waiting for them. Kupitar had never seen so many dead animals in one place. Come to think of it, he had never seen this many dead animals in his life altogether. The silence in the valley had a weight to it that made the air itself heavy and thick. It felt as if the dead were speaking to him. They were not speaking with words, but with their dead eyes and limp bodies. Clusters of dead boars were seen everywhere, while the bodies of the dead horses were spread out across the valley with a larger distance between them. Pools of blood could be seen near most of the dead horses, indicating that they had died from bleeding to death, from gashes in their stomachs and in their legs caused by tusks. A distant wolf's howl far to the north shook the heavy silence that hung in the air. Moments later, another howl could be heard from the north, then another. 10 heartbeats later, another howl could be heard to the west, then another, and another, 3 in total. The 2 sets of 3 howls were almost identical in time between them. Kupitar thought that they might be howling to relay a message to the other hunting parties. If they were repeating the same sequence of howls, it must be the way they communicated that they could see to the other wolves. Kupitar never knew that wolves did that. He was surprised to find that he never really thought about how wolves and lions communicated with each other while they were hunting. He wondered if lions communicated from a distance too, using loud roars. He wondered if his father, Manat, or any other older horses knew about this. Kupitar wondered if horses could also develop a method of communicating from a distance. There was no reason why they shouldn't be able to, even though they couldn't make as loud a sound as a wolf's howl or a lion's roar. Kupitar looked at Malad and Guban. He found them both looking at the battlefield. Staring in shock and disbelief was a more accurate description of how they stared at it. "Let's catch up with the rest of the company. Those wolves will be here soon." They both nodded eagerly, happy to hear that they could leave this uncomfortable and disturbing place. Kupitar walked down the hill with a heavy heart and with even heavier legs. A weight the size of a large boulder was resting on his shoulders. He felt as if the weight of over 200 dead boars and 48 dead stallions were all weighing down on him. He had never felt such feelings of guilt and shame in his entire life. A heavy sense of failure, accompanied with a dark and heavy feeling of sadness, such as he had never felt before, tried to consume him. It was only when he saw dozens of corpses surrounding him that he noticed that he was walking through the battlefield. He sidestepped when he needed to, in order to avoid stepping on bodies, forcing himself to look at the face of every dead horse that he passed. He carved their faces into his memory, because it was his fault that they were dead. It was his incompetence that led to their deaths. And this guy's taken all the guilt with him. Jeez. When he was halfway through the battlefield, he started to look at the faces of the dead boars as well. In many ways, they were the real victims of this day. They didn't have a choice of whether or not they needed to fight. They fought out of the need to protect their herd. Kupitar slowly realized that none of the dead stallions had a choice either. Any stallion who refused to go to war against the boars would face King Darubu's judgment. Kupitar knew very well his father would not have been gentle and understanding towards any stallion who refused to fight today. When Kupitar reached the line of the last corpses on the field, he turned around slowly, making himself look at the whole battlefield, taking in each corpse individually as he swept his gaze across the field. He rested his gaze on each dead body for a brief moment, as he silently apologized to them in his heart. He wasn't sure if he felt more guilty for not being able to save the horses or the boars. Movement far to the north caught his attention, but he couldn't make out the shape clearly. He figured it was probably wolves. Kupitar turned around to find Guban and Malad waiting for him 20 strides away. He wasn't sure if they walked through the battlefield as he did. but when he nodded to their faces, he knew that they hadn't. The look of discomfort was too strong in their eyes, which convinced him that they wouldn't have been able to walk through the corpses as he had. He joined them, as the three of them walked over the hill to the west. When they walked over the hill, they saw the wounded horses from the battlefield with his company walking slowly toward the tribe's grazing lands, a few hundred strides away from them, with the sun slowly descending over their heads. Kubitar did not realize how much time had gone till now. It was well past midday. He wanted to put as much distance between them and the battlefield before nightfall, and so he increased their pace to a quick trot. The rear guard saw them approaching and turned around to greet them, as Cujo came over to report to Kubitar. More wolf howls could be heard in the distance, followed by more howls that answered them in reply. Kubitar tried counting them, in an attempt to interpret what they meant, in order to try and predict if they were in danger of a wolf attack. But he figured to himself that only foolish wolves would try and attack them when there were so many dead horses and boars lying on the ground that they could easily eat instead. Cujo reached him and turned around to walk beside him. Kubitar was pleased to see him seemed confident and relaxed. This wasn't the first time that Cujo found himself as Kubitar's second. During training, the 3rd, 4th, and even 5th in command in every company had to take on the role of second in command to gain experience for these situations. In addition to training for being second in command, they also had to train for being first, in case Kubitar fell in battle or injured a leg during a march. The wounded are able to walk farther than I thought. I hope they were able to walk 1,000 strides before nightfall. I'm letting the stallion who's most injured influence my decision. Once he can't go on anymore, I'll give the order to set up camp. There's a small water hole not too far. The wounded need water. Everyone else does too, for that matter. I'm planning on setting up camp in a circle formation with the wounded horses positioned in the middle. I figured half of the uninjured stallions should be on guard duty, while the other half sleeps. I will instruct them to rotate the watch halfway through the night. I want to set out again at dawn. Kubitar was impressed and relieved that Cujo was assuming the position of second in command so well. It also meant that Kubitar could be left alone till they returned to the tribe's grazing lands, letting Cujo make all of the decisions for him. You did well, Cujo. Thank you for taking care of everything. Cujo nodded in reply. Kubitar could tell that it was hard for both of them to have Cujo replace Leitan, who was a good friend with both of them. They joined the others and kept the slow walking pace set by the stallion with the worst injuries. Kubitar nodded to Guban and Malad and walked off by himself, leaving them with Cujo. He wanted to have a few words with each and every one of the wounded horses. It was important to him that they each saw how he cares for them. They were part of his tribe, and therefore a part of his family. He wanted to make sure that none of them felt that the pace was too hard for them. He knew all too well how they were taught to push themselves to their limit, and then try to push themselves even harder since they were colts. He didn't want anyone doing that now. Besides, this was the first battle for all of them. They were all exhausted and shaken from losing lifelong friends. He wanted to lift their spirits, and to comfort them from the emotional and mental toll of such a hard day. It was only then that Kubitar realized that it was mostly his own spirits he wanted to lift by trying to lift theirs. By assuming the supportive and comforting role, he would find more comfort and support for himself that he needed, that he would be providing to the stallions he spoke to. When the sun started to set across the plains, they made camp near the small waterhole Cujo had mentioned earlier. After they all drank and ate, the wounded horses went to sleep, while the uninjured ones separated into two groups that would rotate between each other for guard duty throughout the night. Kubitar wasn't able to sleep, even though his body and his mind were extremely exhausted. After tossing and turning for a while, he finally gave up on sleep. He got up, figuring he should inspect the horses who were on watch to see how they were doing. He made sure to have a good conversation with each squad as he made his rounds. They were all part of his own company. He was on good and friendly terms with all of them. He made sure to ask each and every one of them about their families. Kupitar felt it was important to remind them of their families after such a tough day. He was happy to see that it cheered up most of them, even if it was only for a little bit. As he made the rounds, he felt a wave of fatigue wash over him. He waited for the first watch to be over so he could repeat the same round of conversations with the other half of stallions in his company while they were on guard duty. After completing his round of personal conversations with the second shift, he went back to where everyone was sleeping, hoping to fall asleep and get some rest. At dawn, Cujo started to wake up all the sleeping horses. Kupitar woke up to the sounds of horses getting on their legs and stretching out their tired and aching bodies. After they broke camp, they started to march back to the tribe's grazing lands. Kupitar made sure to speak to every one of the injured horses during the day. He wanted to make sure that they all felt well enough to continue marching. He also wanted to see how they were holding up, to make sure that they were doing well after the battle. You could never know how a horse who lost friends and potentially even close relatives will handle themselves these days after the battle. This was the first battle for all of them. Even though they had all trained intensely to prepare themselves for the actual fighting, no one had ever prepared them for the emotional and mental aftermath of fighting in a real battle with casualties on both sides. Kupitar was happy to see that, the given circumstances, they were in a relatively good mood. As they slowly marched west in silence, Kupitar realized how happy he was his father gave him this task. In addition to making sure that the wounded horses were recovering physically, emotionally, and mentally, Kupitar wanted to save time to think about the last few days' events. He couldn't shake off the feeling that if his father remained king, he would most definitely make Maekar king instead of Kupitar. Even if he didn't make Maekar king, there was no telling what further crimes his father might commit as king, or how many animals that weren't horses would be victims of his potential future unnecessary battles. Kupitar knew that his father wouldn't step down on his own unless he felt that the king who replaced him would lead the tribe in the direction that he wanted. The only way for Kupitar to replace his father would be to challenge him to single combat. What made Kupitar uncomfortable about that thought was that he would have to win in order to become the next king. There was no way his father would yield and live to face the shame of being defeated by his own son, especially not the son who went against his ways. He wasn't exactly eager to fight his own father in single combat in order to be king. First of all, he wasn't sure he would actually win the fight, or survive a single combat challenge against his father. His father was well into his prime, even if he was at the end of it. His father was a seasoned warrior, with more battle experience than he had, possessing a higher level of self-confidence than his fighting capabilities than Kupitar had. The second reason Kupitar was not exactly eager to challenge his father to single combat was that even if he did win, he wasn't sure the tribe would accept him as their king. Many among the tribe saw his views towards the other animals, especially towards the bison, as a sign of weakness, which could lead to jeopardizing the tribe's safety. Most of those horses even thought that his views were a sign that he was too afraid of fighting predators to protect the tribe from danger. Some even thought that he preferred to join them, only in order to avoid having to fight them. Kupitar figured that there were now at least 48 families that probably didn't see his views as so stupid and ridiculous anymore. Those families will never see their beloved fathers, sons, and brothers again. Kupitar wondered if that was the truth, or if he was just trying to convince himself of the fact. As he kept on thinking about it, he realized that it was the first time he had ever actually thought of challenging his father to single combat. After all, until now, he never had a reason to. Their disagreements never had such a weight behind them as they did now. Before yesterday, Kubitar had never seen fighting another horse as a reasonable course of action that would help reach any kind of goal or objective. He was slowly coming to realize that fighting his father could potentially save many horses' lives, and possibly even other animals' lives too. Now that Kubitar had seen a battle, and has even killed other animals, he was not as hesitant of committing violence as he was in the past. He needed to remind himself that fighting smaller and slower boars was not the same as fighting a full-grown stallion of his own size and strength, especially when that full-grown stallion was your own father. As they marched over a low hill, they reached another small waterhole. Kubitar waited for everyone to drink before drinking himself. He informed Cujo that he would join the scouts to the east to see for himself that they weren't being followed, which of course was just an excuse. He wanted more time to think everything through without any distractions. Kubitar approached the hill to the east where the scouts stood, keeping watch for any wolves or lions who might be following them. The scouts noticed Kubitar walking toward them. Some of them turned around to greet him, while the others kept their eyes to the east. These were the stallions from his own company. They were his friends. They trusted him to lead them in battle. He trusted them to follow his orders during any combat situation, but he wasn't sure how much he could trust them with his thoughts. Especially not with the kind of thoughts he was currently having. He needed to remind himself of the fact before he joined them on the hill. Kubitar felt frustrated that he came out here to think, and that he would end up needing to talk to other horses after all. He took comfort in the fact that he would have some time to quietly think to himself once they continued on their way, after the short rest at the waterhole. Yes, I should also drink from my own waterhole. Thank you. That sounded kind of weird when I said that. We only have about 5 pages until the end of this chapter, and this chapter is definitely one of the longer ones of all of them, so. And then we'll do our Stream Raiders battle. Did you all get to drink, Maytal? Kubitar asked a tall black stallion from his company. Maytal usually needed to be reminded to drink his fill during training. He didn't like practicing maneuvers or marching with a heavy stomach. While they were training as colts, he would often get lightheaded and dizzy, until Kubitar realized he wasn't drinking enough during water breaks. Since then, Kubitar always tried to make sure that Maytal drank enough. Yes, Kubitar, thank you for asking. Maytal replied with a smile, knowing that Kubitar truly cared for him and wanted to make sure that he was properly hydrated. Kubitar had always liked Maytal. His jokes and his good sense of humor had cheered them up many times when the training got tough during their initial training period as colts on the battlegrass. We were just talking about Leitan, Callan said. Callan was a squat and muscular dun stallion who was one of the quiet ones in the company. It's a shame for him to die like that, Kubitar, Callan added. They all lowered their heads in silence after Callan's statement. Kubitar wasn't sure if he meant that it was a shame for him to die so young, or for no reason, but he wasn't going to ask. He preferred not to hear opinions that made him uncomfortable from stallions in his own company who he considered to be his friends. He had felt bad enough, as it is with the events of the last few days. He didn't want to feel uncomfortable with any of them. His own company was where he felt most at home in the recent years, especially since his opinions were unwelcome among his own family, who all kept reminding him of how wrong he was at every chance they got. Kubitar thought about how much he felt like he belonged with his company, in a way that he never had with his own family. They were all looking at Kubitar, waiting for his reply. When he didn't give one, Maytal said, Before yesterday, most of us were eager to go to war. We were excited to put our training to good use. We felt that we were going to protect the tribe, destroy a dangerous enemy or dare to invade our lands, putting our the families in our whole tribe in grave danger. Many of us thought you were wrong in your opinions, that you avoided attacking the boars because you valued a boar's life more than a horse's life. Most of us don't feel that way anymore, Kubitar. Many of us now agree with you in your ways. Kubitar looked up to meet Maytel's eyes, seeing both honesty and sorrow in his sad face. He saw Maytel's pain from losing his friend from his own company, and friends from other companies as well. Kaylan spoke next, breaking the silence. When the rest of the army moved out and vacated the battlefield, the silence of the dead corpses was the only thing I could feel. I looked at the battlefield, counting the corpses, each and every one of them. There were more than 300 dead horses and boars. When we heard the howls from those wolves who were following the boars, I realized something. The wolves would have hunted us if they could. The boars, on the other hand, would have never attacked me unless it was out of self-defense. We killed so many of them. It was difficult for me to look at them without feeling such a strong sense of guilt after realizing that they were not the real enemy. In my opinion, we should have taken them in. Even if we didn't, we could have at least simply told them they are not welcome among us, that they should march on in any direction they choose, as long as they didn't come anywhere near our grazing lands. Kubitar was so surprised by what he had just heard that his mind froze completely. He didn't even know what to say in response to what he had just heard. He never thought he would ever hear those words from any of the other stallions in the company, or in the tribe for that matter. Maybe the massacre of the boar army will change the opinions of many of the horses in the tribe regarding other prey animals, and whether or not the tribe should ever go to war against any of them in the future. It was easy to be in favor of war when the cost and casualties was not something you thought about or ever had to experience. Kubitar looked at each other of the other horses standing with him on the hill and gave them each a good look in the eyes as he tried to measure them. When he saw their unwavering eyes and honest faces, he nodded to each of them. "Thank you, all of you. Your words and your support mean more to me than you could ever imagine. I am honored and grateful beyond measure to be part of your company. I hope to lead you as best as I can in years to come. Hopefully, we don't need to lose another member of our company, at least not if I have anything to say or do about it." Kubitar couldn't help but feel that as long as his father was king, there was a good chance that yesterday's casualties won't be the last ones in the years to come. If Maekar was made king after his father, which seemed more likely now than ever before, who could tell how many useless wars he might drag the tribe warriors into? Kubitar felt the weight of the responsibility and duty weigh down on him, his aching shoulders, as he thought about it. Maytal smiled at him, touching his nose with his. "Since you asked so nicely, I'll have a few words with the rest of the company. We can tolerate you for a few more years. If you behave yourself, that is. But don't get any ideas of making us run laps around the battlegrass again, or I'll kick you where it hurts." Kubitar laughed. "Don't worry about that, Maytal. I'll send Menat." That made all of them laugh, but laughter was short and light. Their mood was still dark. They were all aching in more places than just in their limbs and in their bones, but the short laughter did make them all feel a little less heavy and sad. It made them feel more alive again, which they were all grateful for. It took them 3 more days to get back to the tribe's grazing lands. They kept an easy pace, making camp early near a different watering hole every night. They stopped to rest often and for long periods of time throughout the day. Kubitar wanted the wounded to return in good spirits and well rested. What he found when they returned did not surprise him. There were lots of scouts patrolling in a wider perimeter than usual around the tribe's grazing lands, which looked like one big battlegrass. There were horses training everywhere. The air buzzed with tense activity. Kubitar felt his whole body slowly become more and more tense as they kept walking west. As he scanned the grazing lands, he spotted his father, Menat, Makar, and a few of the other company commanders inspecting a maneuver that the Colts, who were currently training, were performing on the battlegrass. Kubitar turned to Jakku. "Have the company and the wounded form up next to the Tree of Kings. I want the front lines to be horses from our company only." Jakku nodded, relaying Kubitar's orders to the others. Many of the horses saw them approach. They began making their way towards them to greet them. Within a short while, Kubitar saw his father and his entourage make their way towards them as well. Kubitar wasn't sure how this day would end, but he knew what he had to do, both for his sake and for the sake of the tribe. And that was a very long chapter. By golly. People say that? By golly? I don't know. Whew. Boy, let me tell you. When we read this on Sunday, the first chapter was kind of like that, kind of long and winded. But then all the next chapters that we read right after that were all nice and short. So I guess we'll see how it goes. All right. What do we got going on here? We got a lot of enemies. Oh boy. I think... yeah, we're just going to curse this group right here. 3, 2, 1. Good luck. "19 allies and 74 enemies. Oh boy. Good luck fighters indeed. Crikey. Well, you're certainly putting dents in them, I'll tell you that much. 14, 13. Well, my guy's dead, that's for sure. But 13th and Bubble are killing everybody, and that's it. I am shocked. Happily shocked, but I am shocked. So, well-deserved gold there. Good job. Good job indeed. Whew. Made it. Alright. I have no idea what's going to happen here. But we're going to go like this. Just let's stick together as a group, and perhaps we'll get through it. We fight for our captain. That's very kind of you. You know, one thing that I want to do as I read other people's books is be very honest about the book that we're reading. And one thing that I appreciate about this book is that it isn't just a story about animals that fight. There's emotion to these animals. There's depth and meaning in what they're trying to do, whether it's good or bad. So that's good about the book. What's difficult for me, though, as the reader, and I will talk to the author about this one-on-one as well, is the style in which it's written. There's places and parts that I feel are a bit redundant, and how it's physically written, and you can't see this because you can't see the text because it's not a Kindle version, but the way that some of the pages are typed out, I feel like the paragraphs could be combined to make longer paragraphs, where right now it's all broken up, if that makes any sense. So sometimes for the reader, it's difficult to tell if we are starting something new to discuss or not, because some of the paragraphs, how they're written in the book, should be together as one paragraph. So there might be 3 or 4 1 or 2 line paragraphs in here that should be all together in one clump, just because they're all talking about the same thing. They haven't changed context or anything like that. So that makes it a little difficult for me to read. But as far as the story overall, I appreciate what this story is trying to bring. I just think it's in need of a little bit more editing work, basically. But overall, I think this is a decent story. I'm enjoying seeing how Kubitar, the king's son, is fighting within himself about what to do. You know, he's struggling with this concept of, I need to follow a king's orders, but I've also got this family issue where my father doesn't listen to me and doesn't respect what I'm saying. And at the same time, I've got, you know, this hope to be king one day, but he can't tell if anyone is gonna believe in him, because his way of thinking is like new age kind of thing. It very much relates to, I think, things that are happening present day, here and now. There's a lot of new ways of thinking. LGBTQ, for example, is an easy one. BLM, another. And there's very much a divided stance on those concepts within our country and throughout the world. So it's relatable in that way of progression and moving forward and trying to change the ways of the past for something new and hopefully better. And for Kubitar, his ways of thinking are not the old ways of thinking at all, and he struggles with that internally. So, like I said, storyline, I think it's got a good story. It's just I'm struggling a bit as the reader, trying to figure out how to read it properly because of how it's structured on the page. So ND Goodman, when you join us on Sunday, if you can, or when you hear this video, I say this criticism as constructive as I can, so that we can have a conversation later, and who knows, maybe you'll restructure this for the next reader. We shall see. But until then, do me a quick hydrate. And if you're interested in this author and what they have to offer, that is the link in the chat for their current book. It is the first book of at least one more, maybe 3, I'm not 100% sure. It just says book 1 of the Beast series, so we know there's at least another. So feel free to check her out, see what you think for yourself. My opinions are of my own, and feel free to make yours. So, with that in mind, let's continue on and see what happens. Our next chapter title is simply Menat, so we're going to be seeing or experiencing things about him or through his eyes, just as we did with Kubitar in the last chapter. Here we go. Menat walked behind the other company commanders as they all made their way towards the Tree of Kings to greet Kubitar and the wounded stallions who had just returned to the tribe's grazing lands. Most of the horses in the tribe were making their way to the Tree of Kings as well. The previous gathering at the Tree of Kings was only 5 days ago, when the companies who left for battle returned to the tribe's grazing lands. Darubu made a victory speech as the whole tribe gathered to celebrate the army's glorious and heroic victory. Darubu spoke about how the army protected the tribe from the boars who wanted to bring the lions and the wolves who were chasing them to the tribe's grazing lands to hunt the foals and the mares. Darubu said that if they hadn't gone to fight the boars, then more horses would have died from the lions and the wolves hunting them instead of focusing on hunting the boar, as they did now. Menat didn't like the speech at all. As far as Menat was concerned, there wasn't much of a victory to celebrate. He didn't want the boars dwelling in their lands or crossing through them, but he didn't think they needed to attack them without at least warning them to march off in another direction. Menat felt a deep and heavy feeling of regret weighing down on him. The losses amounted to the number of a whole company. He knew each and every one of them personally. What made it worse was that he had to pay his respects to each and every one of their families, their fathers, mothers, brothers, wives, sons, and daughters. There hasn't been such a loss to the tribe's numbers since the day Hamat, Darubu's father, had died. It was hard for Menat to lose so many of the young stallions that he had trained himself, especially since he had never experienced it in the past. It was a lot harder for him than he had ever expected it to be. He thought of each and every one of the stallions he had trained as members of his own family. He remembered each and every one of them reporting for training as frightened and insecure colts, regardless of how tough they tried to make themselves seem to him and to the other colts who reported for training with them. Usually, it was the ones who tried to look the toughest, who were actually the most frightened. Quite often, those colts provided to be outstanding warriors and truly wonderful stallions to be around. He thought about how each of the fallen warriors had developed from young colts into impressive stallions. Many of them made Menat proud beyond measure when they started their own families. Every time he saw them, he thought about the evolution that took place inside each and every one of them on the battlegrass. They grew up mentally and emotionally right in front of him. He enjoyed watching every moment of it, as every general should, watching frightened recruits become strong and confident warriors. He watched with pride as they grew into fierce fighters and reliable soldiers. He knew how well they bonded with the other colts in their company and what their personal struggles were throughout the 3-month training period. When Menat saw a colt having too many difficulties, he would often speak to them privately when the others wouldn't notice. He would encourage them in a relatively cold and tough way, but it would still be an encouragement of a paternal nature. Menat had always considered himself to be a hard stallion. These feelings of grief and sadness were new to him, making him extremely uncomfortable and insecure. Inevitably, the intense pain of grief that he felt for losing so many of the stallions he trained reminded him, after all, deep down, he was still an emotional and soft horse. It reminded him that he was still capable of feeling pain. He was starting to feel more and more comfortable with it every day that passed since the battle. Menat ignored the conversation between the company commanders and Darubu as he let himself sink even deeper into his thoughts. As they were getting closer to the Tree of Kings, where the whole tribe was slowly gathering, he let himself get lost into thoughts of regret for not doing things differently. Regret for not supporting Kubitar's attempts to persuade Darubu not to attack the boars before giving them a harsh warning, which could have prevented the death of so many young stallions who had their whole lives ahead of them. There were many families in the tribe who would have been far better off right now if Menat had joined Kubitar's attempts to persuade Darubu to call off the attack. Whispers had already started to spread among the families in the tribe as many started to see things differently following the battle's death toll. Surprisingly, many of those who started to change their opinions did not lose any family members in the battle. There were also rumors that some of the horses in the tribe were already claiming that Kubitar was right in his opinions about joining forces with other prey animals instead of fighting them, but Menat found that hard to believe. This was not something that any horse would admit publicly, especially not as long as Darubu was king. Many of the stallions among the companies that participated in the attack of boars spoke highly of Kubitar's fighting during the battle. The way he leapt over the first boar, dropping 2 boars while he was still in the air, was the most famous battle story among the stallions in the army. It quickly became the most famous battle story among the whole tribe. Many have been speaking of how Kubitar may currently be the best fighter in the tribe. He was becoming a legend among the younger stallions, who thought that a horse's fighting capabilities was the most important thing about him. Menat, on the other hand, knew better. A horse's true measure went far beyond how well he could perform in battle. Some of the dumbest, most cruel and annoying horses that Menat had ever met just so happened to be very good fighters. Menat looked up to see Kubitar's company arrive at the Tree of Kings, along with the wounded horses. All of the wounded horses looked well rested and in good condition. Menat was proud of Kubitar, especially since he had always been like a son to him. No matter how many difficulties and challenges Kubitar had to face, he met them all head-on, with an unwavering dignity and a true display of nobility. Menat would never tell him how proud he was of him until he was king. To be more accurate, if he ever did become king. He proved himself in every way possible in the last few days. His scouting and strategic analysis capabilities were almost perfect. His company performed very well under his command during the battle and after it. Even though Darubu was surprised by this, Menat was not. Menat knew that ever since Kubitar's company completed their training on the battlegrasses colts, they had always performed well during the army's summer training sessions. This was mainly because the entire company were actually his friends, which was very rare among the army's companies, where there were usually a few stallions who were not fond of their company commander. In some cases, there was real hatred toward them. Friends responded to leadership in a better way than they did to orders given by someone that stallions didn't like so much, or even hated. Each and every one of the horses in Kubitar's company would follow him anywhere, and for any reason. Their families felt a strong sense of security knowing that Kubitar led their sons, husbands, and brothers into battle, which was not a common thing in the tribe. The tribe stallions liked to talk about these kinds of things among themselves. The way Kubitar's company spoke about him would quite often make other companies respect Kubitar even more than they did their own company commanders. Unfortunately, Darubu still refused to see Kubitar as the future king of the tribe. The main reason for that, in Menat's opinion, was the fact that Kubitar spoke about reinstating the pact with the bison of all animals. It was common knowledge that Darubu hated the bison with an intense fury that has not been seen by a king in a long time. Darubu would never be able to hear from anyone about reinstating the pact with any other animal species without getting enraged about it, without developing immediate contempt towards anyone who spoke about it, even if it was own son. He might even get angry about it if it was his own son, who spoke about making a pact with his grandfather's killers. Menat understood and empathized with Darubu's feelings as much as he did with Kubitar's vision. Personally, Menat thought that there could never be another pact with bison, considering how much most of the tribe hated them, or a pact with any other animal species for that matter. Menat looked up to see most of the tribe had already gathered around the Tree of Kings, while the rest were still making their way to the tree. Menat had the company commanders who were walking behind Darubu were getting closer to the tree and were now only a few hundred strides away from the perimeter of its shadow. Since Menat was walking slowly, lost in his thoughts, he slowly fell behind and was no longer in front of Darubu's entourage. He quickly trotted to the head of the column to be closer to Darubu as the crowd made way for Darubu and his entourage to pass. Menat noticed that Kubitar had a deadlier look on his face than Menat had ever seen. Sensing that something was wrong, Menat quickened his step. When he reached Darubu and Makar, they had just stopped after they got through the crowd, standing at the edge of the large clearing under the massive tree. Menat stood on Darubu's left side, as Makar stood on Darubu's right side. The clearing under the tree was roughly 100 strides wide and almost the same in length. Kubitar stood on the other edge of the clearing with his company behind him in a row of 10 stallions wide and 4 stallions deep. The other wounded stallions from the battle stood in the same formation behind them. Within a short while, the rest of the tribe had arrived. There was now thousands of horses surrounding the tree from all sides. The sound of them all standing together in such a small area made a sound that sounded like a loud fly buzzing in the air. There was a strong sense of anticipation that could be felt. Kubitar stepped forward, and the crowd slowly grew silent. Occasional sounds could still be heard, here and there, from the large crowd. "We have returned, King Darubu," Kubitar yelled from towards his father. With such a large number of horses surrounding them, he had to yell at the top of his lungs in order to be heard. Even with yelling, he could barely be heard by everyone. The crowd of horses grew even more quiet, waiting to hear what was said next. Darubu stepped forward to stand apart from his little entourage, leaving Makar and Menat behind him. "That is good, Kubitar. You have done well. The tribe thanks you for your service." Kubitar and Darubu stared at each other for a few moments from across the clearing, making the tension in the air grow more and more intense with every heartbeat. Kubitar took a step forward. "Only the wounded have returned with us. We couldn't bring back the bodies of the dead stallions who followed you to attack the boars. Their bodies still lay on the battlefield. Some of their bodies are already rotting. Those who haven't yet been eaten by the wolves and lions who were following the boars." Darubu waved his head to the side as he stomped his right hoof on the ground with a loud thud that could be heard by the entire crowd. He then exhaled loudly, stomping his hoof on the ground a second time. Menat could see that Darubu was trying very hard to hold back his anger. It looked like a log trying to hold back the entire river after a winter storm. Darubu's fury and rage were about to explode, and Menat knew it. His own son, confronting him and disrespecting him in such a way in front of the whole tribe. Darubu would never forgive such a public insult from anyone, not even from Kubitar. He couldn't, if he wished to maintain his current strong reputation as a fierce leader with full and absolute control over the horse tribe. The air between Kubitar and Darubu was so tense that Menat thought that if he kicked a rock between them, it would shatter to pieces. The looks they gave each other were not looks you would expect to find between a father and his son. This was a strong and hard warrior king who led the tribe in one direction, and a son who defied him, trying to lead the tribe in the exact opposite direction. Their conflict was more than just a confrontation between a father and his son. Within their conflict, 2 separate ways of life and 2 completely different ideologies battled against each other. It was the battle between the approach of companionship and alliances with other animals and tribes, and the opposite approach that saw them as enemies you went to war against. Kubitar's words were an open rebellion against the king, and he did it in front of the whole tribe. Darubu closed his eyes, breathing slowly, trying to hold back his rage. Manak could clearly see how hard it was for Darubu as he tried to avoid losing his temper completely. His breathing grew louder and faster. He stomped the ground with his front right hoof, loud and hard. He lifted his leg in the air again, holding it there, in midair, slowing down his breath. He lowered his leg to the ground. His breathing slowed down even more. Darubu looked like he was finally calming down. Suddenly, he stomped the ground 3 times with his right hoof faster than Manak could blink. Slowly, Darubu opened his eyes, staring at Kubitar with a cold and determined look. He stepped forward. "You are a fool, Kubitar. You would have me let the boars bring death upon us all. How could you put the tribe in such danger? And for what? To protect a few weak boars who can't fight their own battles without getting us involved? Think of your own tribe for once, as I tried to tell you so many times." In response, Kubitar took a few steps forward, towards Darubu, and then he stopped. Rage and fury, pain and anger were clearly expressed, all over his face, especially in his eyes. Manak took comfort in the fact that at least they were still 90 strides away from each other. They shouldn't get too close to each other in their current state. If they did, they would surely clash. He prepared himself to rush forward and stand between them if either one of them moved towards the other. He needed to stop this conflict now, before it was too late, before anyone got hurt. Kubitar yelled back as he started walking forward slowly. "Why didn't you think of the tribe? We lost 48 stallions fighting the boars. They would have still been alive if you hadn't attacked the boars. We could have at least warned them off. They would have never kept coming this way if we had warned them that we would attack them if they would keep moving towards us. 48 stallions are dead because you let your contempt for other animals make your decision for you." Darubu stood in his place, breathing heavily, stomping the ground again and again. "You fool!" Darubu screamed in rage, taking a step forward. "You damn fool! And to think that you were supposed to be king. Maekar will now become the king after my time. As for you, you are hereby cast out from the tribe's lands for life. If you ever return, I will kill you myself. You are no son of mine." Everything and everyone stood still when Darubu finished speaking. The waves of shock could be felt and seen everywhere. No one moved. Not a sound was made. Kubitar stood in his place. He straightened his back, relaxing his shoulders. "I challenge you, King Darubu. I challenge you to single combat, right here, right now, under the Tree of Kings. Let fate decide who will be king. Let fate decide who will live, and who will die this very day." Kubitar yelled in rage. Manak felt his knees go weak. He had to struggle to draw in breath. No one has challenged a reigning king for as long as anyone could remember, but one thing Manak knew for certain. No king could turn it down, even from someone who had just been cast out publicly. Especially not if the challenge was made in front of the whole tribe. A king who refused to accept such a public challenge would be showing a sign of weakness in front of the whole tribe, a tribe that would never forget, nor forgive. But even if Darubu could refuse Kubitar's challenge and get away with it, he never would. He was too proud, and too eager to demonstrate his strength to both the tribe, and even more so to Kubitar. Furthermore, he was way too angry to do anything but accept the challenge and fight. Manak could barely breathe as he felt his shoulders weigh down on him like 2 huge boulders. He knew that either Kubitar or Darubu would die today. One of them will be killed by the other. He wasn't able nor willing to try and stop it. A challenge was a challenge. The law was the law. Tradition was tradition. And that was that. They were the horse tribe of the plains, and if they abandoned their old ways, they were nothing but grass to be stepped on. Manak drew in breath as he braced himself to watch a father, his king, his oldest and closest friend, fight his son, whom Menat loved as his own nephew, in a fight to the death. A heavy silence hung in the air, an intense anticipation that could be felt by everyone. Darubu slowly swept his gaze across the crowd that was gathered around them. Then he turned to Kubitar, who was still standing where he did when he made the challenge. "So be it, Kubitar. I would have preferred to banish you as an example for other foolish young horses, so that every rebellious son will learn of what happened to Kubitar the fool. Let your death act as a warning to all sons to respect their fathers and to follow our ways. But if I must kill you instead, so be it. You are the one who leaves me with no other choice than to kill you myself. Come forth, foolish and rebellious son. Come here and get your last and final lesson in discipline. Come and die under my hoof." Kubitar stood in place, not taking the bait of Darubu's words that were said in an attempt to try and lure him into attacking first. Kubitar looked relaxed, with a look of concentration and focus on his face. Even though Kubitar stood in place, he looked like he was holding back a stampede, waiting to be let loose and wreak havoc on anything and everything that stood in its way. Menat had to look closely to see that Kubitar was breathing fast. He did look nervous after all. Darubu looked a little nervous too, but he still had a very focused look on his face. He seemed more confident than Kubitar did. Darubu and Kubitar faced each other from a distance of 80 strides away from each other. Darubu started walking slowly. Kubitar stood in his place, waiting. Menat and every other horse in the tribe held their breath, watching Darubu and Kubitar's every move. Darubu was now 70 strides from Kubitar. He kept on walking forward slowly. Suddenly, Darubu leapt forward, gaining more and more speed with every step, covering 10 strides in the blink of an eye. When Darubu covered 30 strides, leaving roughly 50 strides between them, Kubitar finally made his move, running forward to meet him. Darubu was almost at a full gallop when Kubitar finally moved, as they both gained more and more speed and momentum with every step. When the distance between them was only 20 strides, Kubitar made a sharp turn to the right, placing Darubu on his left side. Darubu turned to the left as much as he could, trying to follow Kubitar. Kubitar then made a sharp turn to the left. Darubu tried to turn left too, but he was losing his balance from trying to turn against such speed. Kubitar made another sharp turn to the right, which placed Darubu directly behind him, only a few strides away from him, closing in fast. Kubitar leaned forward, lowering himself so that he leaned on his 2 front legs. He kicked backwards with his 2 back legs, just as Darubu came within kicking range. Kubitar's back left leg hoof met Darubu's front left leg right in the kneecap. Darubu's left leg broke in the middle with a loud crack. The momentum of Darubu's charge propelled him forward as he crashed into Kubitar's back, losing balance as he did so. Still trying to fight, Darubu lowered his head as he fell forward, trying to bite Kubitar. Kubitar stepped forward, avoiding the snap of Darubu's teeth, as Darubu fell down hard on the front right knee. Just as Darubu was trying to get up on his front right leg, Kubitar kicked backwards again with both back legs. This time, both hooves made direct contact with Darubu's chest. The impact of Kubitar's hooves with Darubu's chest could be heard with a loud thud. Darubu looked like he was going to fall backwards from the force of the blow. He turned his head sideways and to the left as he tried to balance himself from falling. Kubitar kicked him again with both hooves, making direct contact to Darubu's head. Darubu fell down on his left side with a loud thump. He wasn't moving. His chest wasn't moving either. Kubitar turned around. He stood a few strides away from him, looking down at his father's body. Murderer. Maekar yelled as he leapt forward and charged at Kubitar. Kubitar stood still and focused on Maekar's movements. Kupitar quickly moved forward towards Makar, standing with Darubu's body right behind him. Within a few heartbeats, Makar was almost at a full gallop. When he was only 10 strides away from Kupitar, Kupitar moved quickly to the right. Makar had to jump over Darubu's corpse to avoid stepping on it. Makar slowed down as he turned to face Kupitar, who was now 30 strides away from him. "Don't make me kill you, Makar," Kupitar yelled. Makar twisted his face in anger and charged at Kupitar with a roar. Kupitar rushed up to meet him, both of them trying to gain as much speed as they could to knock the other down when they clashed. Within a few heartbeats, they crashed into each other, Kupitar's left shoulder meeting Makar's left shoulder. Makar was able to gather more speed to his charge, and Kupitar was pushed back. Kupitar regained his balance, while Makar raised himself onto his two back legs. Makar kicked both of his legs as hard as he could, trying to hit Kupitar's head. Kupitar stepped back quickly. Makar's kick missed Kupitar's head by less than a hoof's length. As Makar's legs were falling to the ground, Kupitar lunged forward. Kupitar's head went straight into Makar's head, mouth open wide, baring his teeth. Makar tried to move his head back from Kupitar's bite, but Kupitar was quicker. He bit Makar's left ear with a tight grip. Makar yelled out in pain as he tried to pull back, but Kupitar's teeth held on tight. Kupitar pulled Makar's head down to the right. As he did so, he straightened his two front legs together, leaning his whole body on his two back legs. Makar's head was being pulled down hard, his body falling forward as he tripped over Kupitar's legs. Kupitar released his grip on Makar's ear as Makar fell to the ground, landing on his knees of his two front legs. Kupitar turned around quickly so his back was facing Makar's right side. He kicked hard with both legs as Makar rolled to the left, barely avoiding his kick. Kupitar turned to face Makar, just as Makar rolled to the left again, getting up quickly, and stood only a few strides away from him. Kupitar charged at him just as Makar started to rise on his back legs, lifting his front legs high in the air, kicking straight towards Kupitar's approaching head. Kupitar lunged to the left, lowering his head as Makar's hoof passed over his head. Kupitar knocked into Makar's back legs, throwing him off balance, pushing him back a few steps. Kupitar took 2 quick steps to the left and turned his back towards Makar just as Makar was trying to regain his balance. Kupitar kicked Makar's right side with both legs, making contact with Makar's ribs. The kick made Makar stumble. He struggled to remain upright. Kupitar kicked Makar in the ribs again with both of his back legs as Makar tried to regain his balance. The force of the kick made Makar shift his entire weight to his left side, falling on his left knee. Kupitar kicked with both of his legs again at the exact same spot. Makar lifted his head as he yelled out in pain, barely able to prevent himself from falling to the ground. Kupitar kicked him again in the exact same spot. Makar's head fell forward as his right front leg buckled, and he tried to lean to the right. He opened his mouth to yell out in pain, but no sound came from him. The next time Kupitar kicked him, there was a loud crack as Makar's ribs broke. He fell on his left side, head thumping as it hit the ground. Kupitar turned to face Makar's limp body. There was silence in the air, disturbed only by the sound of the wind blowing across the plains, rippling through a tribe that stood in complete shock of what they had just witnessed. The whole tribe was silent. No one moved a muscle or made a single sound. Kupitar started walking slowly towards the middle of the clearing under the tree, Darubu and Makar's bodies laying still on the ground beside him. Kupitar walked forward slowly, head tall, chest out, as every single pair of eyes was focused only on him. He stopped in the middle of the clearing, facing the crowd that surrounded him. The branches on the tree rustled in the wind as the tribe waited to see what happened next. "Anyone else want to die today?" Kupitar yelled clear for all to hear. None came forward. One by one, they lowered their heads. They started to chant, Kubitar, 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 Kubitar. And that brings us to the end of part 1. Now, we are in part 2. Man, like I said before, the writing of this could use some help, but the story in of itself is it's pretty intense. So much anger and emotion within these characters. I love horses, so I'm hating this fight. Some of this is hard to listen to. Indeed it is. And at the same time, you have to understand where Kubitar's coming from. He's faced with an impossible decision of what he feels is right, and somehow was brave enough to act upon it, even if it means defeating his own family to do so. Killed his father and severely wounded his brother. Can't tell if he actually died or not, but dang. Like, just ow, you know? Alright. Let's check on our stream readers. Okay, this is gonna be a easy peasy battle. Absolutely easy peasy. Everyone's gonna rush forward. We'll have the high ground. Piece of cake. I love that artillery book. That's so cool. 13th, where did you get that from? Because that thing looks really cool. Good job, everybody. That was a quick and easy battle. Bubble gets the buster. Ah, much needed gold and scrolls. Excellent. Alright, the question is, where do we go next? You trade candy corns in for it. Ah, okay. Yeah, I have some candy corns with my, the players battle. We win again. Absolutely. Let's do one more battle, and then we'll call it for tonight. Yeah, let's go this way. Why make it harder than we have to? Oh, I hate this map. Alright. Everyone just kind of gather right here. I've played this a lot as a user, a player. This just seems to be the easiest place to gather up. I know warriors are good on this one. Archers are definitely good because we're going to be stuck here for a few minutes. So if you have archers available, let's do a line of archers on the perimeter. Normally we would put like tanks on the perimeter, but since we're going to be stuck here, feel free to place some archers, and then you can do tanks as well, and then whatever you want after that. Excellent. So, I'm eager to hear from all of you. What do you think to this book so far? What do you think to the story? Do you feel like, knowing what you've heard, that you would look for the second book? Or the third book, if there is a third? I have no idea. I forgot to ask the author that question. Your voice made me fall back asleep. Well, then I did my job well. That is the goal. So soothing. Thank you, Bubble. I appreciate that. What are we on here? Page 103? So this next chapter is from the perspective of a horse named Farrar, or at least I think it's a horse. Maybe it's not. Actually, I don't think it is. I wonder if it's a wolf. I forget. I need to know how it ends. Excellent book, sad points though. Yeah, that's true. So Farrar is the son of Rannan, the great hunter warrior, rebels against the oppressive and cruel pack leader. So I think we're now looking at part 2 is going to start us off with coming from the wolf perspective. So we're kind of switching gears. It's about 17 pages, so it's not quite as long as the first chapter that we read tonight, but it's certainly up there. So that's probably where we'll end it. So we'll read this and then call it for the night. Sadly, I need to leave for the evening. Thank you for your time tonight. Well, thank you for being here, Hicks. I appreciate it very much. Aranel, gifting a tier 1 sub to Hicks. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing that. It's very kind of you. Aranel, you've been such a huge support of my stream since day one. Since I started reading a lot and we met each other. So thank you so much. That means a lot to me. All right. Let's get into this chapter, and we'll see what happens from the wolf perspective. Farrar was crouching low on his stomach, his paw sinking into the cold mud as he filled his nostrils with the smell of wet earth after a night of rainfall. His thick gray fur was completely wet from head to paw after being out all night, making his way south through the open plains during a cold and rainy winter night. The smell of the recent rainfall hung in the air like a thick fog, making it hard to smell any other animal that might be lurking nearby. A fact that Farrar began to appreciate only a few moments ago. Farrar was exhausted from stalking through the night across the open plains so that no one would notice the approach of their hunting party. This particular hunting party was cold, wet, angry, and extremely frustrated. They were all upset from being kept back from hunting far too long, which had resulted in unfortunate consequences. This was the very first hunt for all 6 members of the hunting party. Farrar would have never been able to convince 5 other wolves to join him on a hunt without their pack leader's permission, if all 5 of them weren't his siblings. His siblings knew that he was what he was truly made of. They believed in his capabilities, which is why they trusted him to lead them on this hunt. They were hunting without their pack leader's permission, an act that was punishable by death. The death penalty for this crime applied to them and to their family members as well. At least it was ever since Gira started leading the pack. Ever since Gira became the pack leader, each and every hunt required her direct permission. But Farrar and his 5 siblings were too hungry, too hurt, and too frustrated with her lack of proper leadership to care whether or not they had their permission. Many of the pack's young cubs have starved to death during the harsh and brutal winter. At first, Farrar agreed with Gira's decision to prevent hunting parties from venturing too far from the pack's caves during the heavy snowfalls of midwinter. Any foolish wolf who left the pack's warm and dry caves during the heavy snowfalls would have wasted too much energy, and would have used up too much fat reserves as they covered ground looking for prey, no matter where they were going, even if it was in the forest itself. During the heart of winter, wolves needed every ounce of fat they have accumulated during the summer in order to survive. A smart wolf knew that he needed to be patient when he was hungry during that time. When the snow was falling, you cuddled up with your family to keep warm, and you waited. Every other animal in the forest, predator or prey, did the same. During the pack's gatherings, Farrar listened to every request for hunting permission. The gatherings at Ghira's cave only took place the night after the moon was completely round and shone in full form. If you couldn't convince Ghira to grant you permission to lead those who would join you in a hunt, you had to wait till the next night after the full moon for another opportunity to try and convince her to grant you that permission. In most cases, waiting that long meant starving to death in your cave along with everyone who counted on you to provide for them. During the pack's meetings, Farrar would listen closely to every hunting party's leader explain their entire plan in an attempt to receive Ghira's permission to lead a hunt. He listened to their approach plan and to their plan of attack. He would listen closely as they proclaimed how much meat they promised to bring back with them, how much of it they would distribute among the pack, and most importantly, how much they promised to give Ghira. Farrar listened carefully as he evaluated each and every wolf and his or her hunting party as they spoke to Ghira. Farrar wanted to know each and every one of the wolves in his pack. He wanted to know how they thought, how they behaved, what motivated them, and what dissuaded them. He wanted to know what made Ghira grant them permission, and what made her decide to deny it. Lately, only those who followed Ghira were getting permission to lead hunting parties. Ghira had a growing number of wolves that did not live with their families anymore. Those who followed Ghira were loyal to her, and to her only. According to the old ways, every hunting party was expected to distribute their kill with the rest of the pack. This way, if a hunting party failed, their families could at least survive till the next opportunity. Recently, some of the wolves in the pack started to realize that there were specific wolves who were always denied Ghira's approval when they requested permission to lead hunting parties, regardless of whether or not it was to hunt the deer or animals who dwelled on the open plains. When families started to whisper about it in their caves, Ghira had to provide an explanation. She claimed that she would only grant permission to wolves that she trusted them to actually distribute their kill with other families in the pack. Some believed her, but most of the pack did not, Farrar among them. For the past 2 winters, Ghira rarely permitted hunting parties to venture out of the forest to hunt the horses or the bison, but she never gave permission for anyone to hunt deer without her. She only allowed hunting parties to hunt deer if she was leading the hunt herself. And she only took the wolves, who were the most loyal to her, with her on the hunts. The fact that Ghira was now the only one leading hunting parties to hunt deer meant that she was one of the only ones leading successful hunting parties who came back with meat. A few years ago, the boars had practically disappeared. The horse tribe and the bison herd dwelled far to the west, out of the open plains. Any hunting party that crossed through the open plains venturing that far south would be spotted from a distance by scouts. The horses and the bison were known to keep their borders under careful watch. Wolves rarely attempted to hunt horses or bison, considering how hard they were to kill, and how well trained they were in combat, and how far they were from the forest. This made the deer the most vital source of food for the pack, and everyone knew where to find them. The deer herd dwelled in the same area of the forest for as long as anyone could remember. Their grazing lands were only a few thousand strides to the east of the wolf's pack caves. Lately, hunting parties found stray boars out in the open plains, not too far from these hills, but no one actually knew where the boar clan had gone. Farrar was surprised to discover that no one had actually ventured into the hills, looking to see if they were up there. which was why Farrar and his siblings came here, hoping to find more of them. Lying on the wet grass, Farrar's thoughts drifted to the last night's pack meeting, which was held in Greer's cave. As everyone expected, Gira made her usual excuses for denying hunting requests. Farrar realized last night that nothing was going to change. As he heard each and every hunt proposal get rejected for some stupid reason that Gira made up, he felt a cold and hard truth sink deep into his bones. Gira was preventing the families in the pack that were not loyal to her from hunting. Those families were starving. Ferrera's family is among them. 2 winters ago, Ferrera's mother gave birth to 8 healthy wolf pups. They had all grown to almost full maturity by the end of last fall. Gieben and Fella didn't have as much meat on them when the winter came as the others did. That was one of the reasons they were both dead now. The main reason they were dead was because Gira prevented his family from hunting. She was keeping those who were loyal to her well fed, while starving those who wouldn't submit themselves to her and join her growing group of followers. Last night, Farrar's request to hunt was denied for the 3rd time in a row. With the bitter taste of failure in their mouths, they had returned to their family's cave along with his mother, Nadana, and his father, Rannan. Seeing his parents so weak and so hungry, Farrar made his decision right then and there. He told his 5 remaining siblings that he was going hunting that very night. They all joined him immediately, ignoring their mother and their father's disapproving looks. After all, hunting without Gira's permission was a death sentence for their parents as well. Farrar figured that if he and his siblings wouldn't hunt without permission to bring back meat for their parents, then their parents would get the same death sentence anyway. Dying from starvation was even worse than being killed by Gira's cronies. At least by defying her tyranny, they would get to end their lives with an act of independence and bravery. They all knew that they would not survive till the next pack meeting. And even if they did, their pleas for Gira's permission to hunt would simply be denied again. Last night, after they left their family cave, they stalked through the forest, avoiding the sentries Gira had placed to the east. The deer dwelled in the eastern part of the forest. Gira's sentries were positioned in locations where a hunting party would cross on their way east towards the deer grazing lands, which was why they headed south, into the open plains, hoping to find the boars. Once they made their way out of the forest, they increased their pace, moving through the open plains till they reached the lower hills. As they started to make their way into the hills, they spotted this small group by coincidence. They barely noticed the small group of boars as they made their way up the first low hill. There were 5 boars altogether. They were well hidden. 2 of them were standing behind bushes, about 200 strides away from where Farrar and his siblings were crouching as low as they could on a small rise of earth and grass, trying to avoid detection. The other 3 boars were sleeping only 20 strides away from the other 2 boars. Farrar motioned with his head to the others to fall back and regroup. He wanted to hear what everyone was thinking before deciding on their plan of attack. One by one, they each crawled backwards until they were hidden from the boar's line of vision. Then they all stood up and huddled together so that they could speak quietly to one another as they discussed their plan of attack. "What's the plan, Farrar?" Kea asked quietly. Among his siblings, Kea was probably the smartest. Sometimes, Farrar thought she might even be smarter than he was. He was happy that one of them got straight to the point. It showed that they were focused and determined. Kea was looking at him eagerly, her hunger and her anticipation showing clearly on her face. Her yellow eyes were shining in bright contrast to her wet and muddy brown fur. Farrar looked at the others, seeing similar looks in their eyes. They were all eager to hunt, almost as much as they were eager to eat already. It was the first time for all of them that they had much to prove. They were all eager to demonstrate their strength and their courage to the others, almost as much as they were eager to prove it to themselves. They all knew that the price of failing here meant starving to death. Simple as that. Farrar wasn't sure how well the boars could fight, but he did know that their tusks were dangerously sharp, long enough to tear into a wolf's stomach. Farrar figured that if they hunted only one boar, it would probably be enough for them. There was no reason to risk trying taking down two, especially not if it risked even one of them injured or killed. Farrar wasn't sure if it was good or a bad sign that the thought of any of them could get killed by the boars didn't make him uncomfortable. After all, it was the simple truth, an inseparable and inevitable part of hunting. Considering the boar size and how dangerous those tusks looked, Farrar figured it could take 2 or even 3 full-grown wolves to take down a full-grown boar without any of the wolves getting hurt in the fighting. He reminded himself of the fact that they were all inexperienced hunters who were all tired and nervous, which would make their attack a lot harder for them. It would even take 4 of them to take down with just one boar without any of them getting hurt. If they tried bringing down 2, they risked the fact that they would only find themselves being attacked in the rear by the other 3 full-grown boars. Farrar was worried about the damage that the boars could inflict on them with those sharp tusks. Laran and Kea, the 2 of you are the fastest ones among us. You will circle around the boars from up the hill to the south, while the rest of us will stay here. Hopefully, the fact that both of you have dark brown fur will help you avoid their attention. Try to move as close as you can to each other so that if they notice you, they will think that you are only one wolf. Once you are in position, we will charge them from where we are now. When they start to run, you spot the slowest one and try and turn it north. Keep biting it in the legs and try to keep it from turning east or south. Do not try and take it down without us. Once we cover a few hundred strides and separate the boar, you will be turning north from the others. We will turn north to join you. We will take it down together. Laran and Kea nodded. The rest of them did. But then Lene asked, "What if they don't run away? What if they stand their ground and fight?" Farrar didn't think of that option, but he was glad that someone did. He looked at Lene, and as he thought about the best answer to her question, noticing that her gray fur was just as wet as muddy as his was. If they stand their ground and fight, then Laran and Kea will watch from a distance and come to our aid when they see that we need it most. How do we choose when to come to your aid, and from which direction? Laran asked. Farrar realized that Laran's question was a clear indicator of how Farrar's leadership was lacking in both strategic thinking and in clear instructions to all members of the hunting party. He suddenly became unsure of what he was doing. His recently developed sense of leadership started to fade away, replaced with feelings of doubt and fear. He tried to think of how to instruct Laran in a way that was simple and easy to follow. That was when Talal said, "After Laran and Kea are in position, the 4 of us should charge the 2 sentries. Farrar and I will charge in first, trying to make them run right into their sleeping friends, while Kea and Laran will hold back from their position on the hill to see if they run. If the 2 boars charge at us, we turn around and run while Lene and Gabar chase them from behind once they run past their position, and take down the slowest one while the others chase us. If they run away, Laran and Kea will find the slowest one and chase it north, biting at its legs to prevent it from turning west towards the lion's territory. We don't want to have it fight off any lions today." Farrar figured that it sounded like a good plan. He studied Talal's face as he considered his suggested plan. His black fur could not conceal how thin he had become over the past few weeks. Talal's eyes shone with eager anticipation, his body poised, ready to hunt and finally eat. Farrar nodded. "All right then. Any questions?" No one answered, which meant they all understood Talal's plan. They all turned around, crawling towards their previous position, where they could keep a lookout on the boars while they sent Laran and Kea to circle around from the south. "The boars are gone," Talal said, a little too loud in Farrar's opinion. They all looked from side to side, trying to spot the boars that were only there a short time ago. There was nothing around them but the bushes and a few trees. Farrar walked ahead to where the boars were only moments ago, crouching low, sniffing the air and listening closely. He did not want to get himself or his siblings killed in an ambush. A boar charging at you could be quite deadly. After a few dozens of strides, he heard sounds ahead. Looking to the east, he saw that the dim twilight of dawn was beginning to spread through the sky as the sun started to rise from the east. Farrar saw taller hills full of trees to the southeast. He quickened his pace. His siblings followed him, looking for the boars. Suddenly, Farrar saw all 5 boars only 200 strides away, heading southeast. All 5 of his siblings joined him in a line, moving forward quietly. Farrar saw all 5 boars walking together. A plan took form in his head. "Stop," Farrar said sharply as he lowered himself to the ground. The rest of them stopped, lowering their bodies to the ground. "Gibar, Tilal, and Lenny, we will charge at the boars in a line, but we do it quietly. The boars will make enough noise on their own when we reach them. We will increase our pace from where we are now gradually and hold the line. Make sure you are part of the line at all times. Do not try and take any of them down yourself. We will do that together. Kea and Laran, stay behind us. Find the slowest one and direct it north. When I see that Kea and Laran have started turning one of them north, I'll yell north as hard as I can. If you hear me yell it, then yell it with me for the others to hear it too. That's the signal to turn north and join Kea and Laran to take down the slowest boar. Everyone ready?" They all nodded. Farrar rose to his feet. They started southeast at a slow run up the hill towards the boars, who were almost 300 strides away from them, moving toward the higher hills. At 200 paces away, he increased the pace only a little. He needed to pace them, so they didn't waste all of their energy before they engaged with the boars. He needed to keep in mind that they still had to chase the slowest boar north, and then take it down as it fought for its life against wolves that had to kill it to stay alive. After that, they will need to make their way north back towards the forest, which was 10,000 strides away. They were now only 100 strides from the boars, when Farrar quickened his pace to a run, the rest joining him. One of the boars turned as he was walking up the slope. "Charge!" Farrar yelled. Tilal, Gibar, and Laney joined him in the charge at full speed, howling and snarling. All 5 boars froze. 3 of them turned around and ran up the hill, while 2 of them turned toward the wolves and charged them. Farrar only had a moment to take it in and plan his reaction. One boar was keeping his head low, tusks pointed outwards as he ran directly towards Farrar, only a few strides from crashing head first into his chest. Farrar took one more stride before leaping to the right. The boar charged past him, his tusk missing his left side by as much as a tooth's length. Farrar landed and rolled. Turning around with the roll, he ran after the boar. As he did, he saw Talal and Gibar crash into the other boar, hitting it in the neck. Lene ran around the boar, and Talal and Gibar crashed into the other side and attacked it from behind. Farrar saw the boar right ahead of him was running towards Lene and Kea. Farrar burst forward with every ounce of speed that he could muster out of his tired legs. When he was close enough, he dove for the boar's back left leg. His teeth sank in hard as he grabbed on tight, pulling the boar's back left leg to the right as the boar tried to pull his leg free from Gerar's grip. He felt the boar fall to the ground. Farrar let go as he rolled to the right. He recovered from the roll and lunged at the boar. The boar was trying to get back up on his legs, but Farrar was quicker. He tackled the boar from the boar's left side, aiming his teeth directly at his neck. They crashed down together. Farrar landing on top of the boar as Farrar's sharp teeth bit into the boar's thick skin. The boar thrashed from side to side, desperately trying to shake him off. Kea and Lene joined him, biting the boar's belly and trying to tear it open as the boar kicked violently. The boar rolled around to the left, which caused Farrar to lose his grip on the boar's neck. He recovered quickly and lunged himself at the boar, biting him again at the exact same place on his neck. Farrar felt warm blood gushing out of the boar's neck as his teeth sank in deeper and deeper. The boar thrashed from side to side, trying to shake him off, as Lene joined Farrar, biting at the boar's neck on the other side. The boar kept on thrashing and kicking as they both tore his neck open, blood spraying on their faces. After a few more moments of thrashing and jolting from side to side, the boar stopped moving. Farrar looked up, relieved to see that all 5 of his siblings were alive and well. He let out a deep breath, relieved that they all survived the fight unharmed. But then he noticed that Talal had blood running down his front left leg. When Farrar walked over to inspect it, Talal tried to back away to hide it from him. "It's fine. It's only a scratch." "Let me see it, Talal. There's no time for being too proud to admit that you're hurt. If it's bleeding, we need to cover it with mud to stop the bleeding. We can't leave tracks of blood or the boars or the lions to follow." "Thank you for that, Lurk." Kea approached Talal with slow steps, a gentle look on her face, which caused Talal to relax and sit down. After all, Talal was always more comfortable with Kea than he was with Farrar. Kea licked the wound for a while till it stopped bleeding. Then she dug up mud from the ground with her paw. She started to gently cover the wound. Farrar looked up at the hills, inspecting their surroundings. There was no sign of movement. As he looked at the east, he saw that the sun was beginning to rise over the hills, pouring daylight everywhere. They all looked at him. They didn't look at the dead boars. There were 2 of them, full-grown boars with thick and heavy stomachs. They all charged in, digging into the boars. They ate as if they could eat away hunger of the cold and harsh winter. They lost any and all concern of boars attacking them while they ate, completely focused on tearing into the boars' bodies with their sharp teeth. They tore the skin apart to reveal more lumps of flesh, covering their heads and their necks in blood. The months of extreme cold and painful hunger were forgotten completely as they filled their bellies with boar flesh. Fur covered in blood, mouth chewing as much meat as he could without choking, Farrar suddenly realized that the grass became significantly more illuminated with the rising sun. He raised his head to look around, noticing that all of his siblings were still digging into the boars. Farrar looked to the east and to the south. There was no movement upon the hills, but that did not mean that it would stay that way for much longer. Lene noticed that he had stopped eating. She looked up at him, noticing the concern on his face. "It's only a matter of time till we see boars coming down those hills, and they won't be surprised to find us here. They'll be coming to kill us. They'll be coming in large numbers." The rest of them looked up from the dead boars they were digging into. That was when Talal said, "We won't run as fast as we normally could with a full stomach. Maybe it's best to leave now, before we have to run for our lives with a full stomach." Farrar looked at the 2 dead boars. There was still a little bit of meat on them. He didn't want to leave them even the smallest amount of meat behind, but they knew that they had to. Just as he made the decision to leave, he saw movement on the hill to the southeast. "They've seen us," Gibar said. They all looked to see the shapes on the hilltop in the distance. The light brown fur of Gibar's neck and shoulders were covered in blood from digging into the face of the dead boars. Farrar looked at Talal and moved towards him, giving the wound a close inspection. It wasn't bleeding. The mud was covering the wound in a way that seemed that it wouldn't let the wound open as they moved. He looked Talal in the eyes. Talal tried to show a tough and unconcerned face. "Let me know if the pace is too hard for you. No need to be ashamed of it." Farrar whispered as low as he could so that only Talal would hear him. He knew that he would never admit to it anyways, but he still felt obliged to say it. With those words, he turned toward the northwest, towards the forest, towards home, with a stomach full of meat, his head and neck covered in blood. And that is the end of the first chapter of part 2. A good stopping point until Sunday when we get back to it. So we went from page 50 to page 120. So we read about 70 pages tonight, so that's great. It's a good pace. And let's do one more Stream Raiders, and then we'll raid out. Okay. Let's put this right here. And good luck. Yep, archers doing their jobs, just as I was hoping. Perfect. It's going to be a little bit before we can move. So all the enemies will come to us. This village treater is a bit of annoying. Yep, there we go. This will be over very soon. Excellent. Good job. Never doubted it for a moment. And we got healer scrolls, and Bubble gets the scrolls. Good job, everybody. Well done. Well fought. Okay. Let me take a look and... oh, perfect. Gentle Fox ASMR is another reading streamer. And right now he's reading Color Out of Space and Picture of Dorian Gray. So he's got a great stream. It's very relaxing. It's very ASMR based. So I think we'll head over there. Really enjoyed the stream. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much, 13th, for being here, for playing Stream Raiders and being part of it. If you're subbed, join me tomorrow night in Discord for a continued read of Coraline as we get prepared to discuss it in the book club. It's a great book, thoroughly enjoying it. And if nothing else, I hope you have a great end of your week, a fantastic weekend, and we'll be right back here Sunday so that we can continue this book and see what happens next with the wolves. And it might help if I spell this guy's name right. Yep, okay. Stick around for the raid, get some shade points. And again, thank you. I appreciate you all. I hope you have a fantastic night, and we will see you next time.